take a picture of it so you don't. Where's Jason? Okay. Okay. Right back there. Sir. This meeting of the Tennessee Higher Education Commission is called to order. Thank you all for being here. We will first call roll. For those of you joining virtually, which I believe is Commissioner Allman, please reminder to state whether anyone else is in the room with you. Madam Secretary?
Chairwoman Scarlett?
Here.
Commissioner Allman?
Here, no one is present with me.
Commissioner Cope?
Here, no one is present with me.
Commissioner Coben? Here. Commissioner Matlock? Here. Commissioner Moser? Commissioner Stafford? Commissioner Wharton?
Here.
Secretary Hargett?
Here.
Treasurer Lillard?
Here.
Commissioner Morrison? Comptroller Mumpower?
Here.
Chairwoman, you have 10 members present and 9 voting members present.
Thank you so much. I'm going to propose amending our agenda this morning. Due to quorum issues, we need to move the chair's report and the executive director's report to be taken up after the action items are handled. Secondly, I'd like to add an action item so we can add Commissioner Whitney Allman to the Access, Academics, and Student Success Committee. I will entertain a motion and a second to adopt. Oh, Madam Secretary.
Chairwoman Scarlett?
Aye.
Commissioner Allman?
Aye.
Commissioner Cope?
Aye.
Commissioner Coben? Aye. Commissioner Matlock? Aye. Commissioner Wharton?
Aye.
Secretary Hargett? Aye. Treasurer Lillard?
Aye.
Comptroller Mumpower?
Aye.
Chairwoman, you have 9 ayes.
Wonderful. Motion carries. Next item is public comment. Dr. Gentile.
Chairwoman, we received no public comment for today's meeting.
Thank you very much. With no questions or objections, I'll entertain a motion and a second to adopt the minutes from January 25th commission meeting.
So moved. Second.
Madam Secretary.
Chairwoman Scarlett?
Aye.
Commissioner Allman?
Aye.
Commissioner Cope?
Aye.
Commissioner Coben? Aye. Commissioner Matlock? Aye. Commissioner Wharton?
Aye.
Secretary Hargett?
Aye.
Treasurer Lillard?
Aye.
Comptroller Mumpower?
Aye.
Chairwoman, you have 9 ayes.
Wonderful. Motion carries. Our first action item is the consent calendar. There are 2 items on the consent calendar, and without objection, we'll vote on them as a set. If there's no questions to the consent calendar, is there any questions, or are there any questions? No? Then I will entertain a motion in a second to approve the consent calendar.
So moved. Second.
Any further comments, discussion? Okay, Madam Secretary.
Chairwoman Scarlett?
Aye.
Commissioner Allman?
Aye.
Commissioner Cope?
Aye.
Commissioner Coben? Aye. Commissioner Matlock?
Aye.
Commissioner Wharton?
Aye.
Secretary Hargett?
Aye.
Treasurer Lillard?
Aye.
Comptroller Mumpower?
Aye.
Chairwoman, you have 9 ayes.
Wonderful. Motion carries. The first item on our regular calendar is the 2024 binding tuition and fee ranges. Treasurer David Lillard, Chair of the Finance and Operations Committee, will provide us an overview of the agenda item and the committee's recommendations. Treasurer?
Thank you, Madam Chair. The committee met recently on this matter, and the Commission will recall that last fall, the Commission adopted a guiding range of 0 to 4%. The committee reviewed various information, including a letter from the Chancellor of the Board of Regents, Dr. Tidings, and also information pertaining to proposed or soon to be effective overtime regulations imposed by the federal government and their effect on, potentially their effect on the need for tuition setting changes in regard to our colleges and community colleges. As a result of that, the committee adopted a recommended guiding range of 0 to 5.5%. And I wanted to, with Madam Chair's permission, call on Amanda Clafin, our staff member, to give the background on all of that, and also Dr. Gentile, if he has any comments about it.
Good morning. Thank you, Chair Scarlett, Chair Lillard, and members of the commission. As Chairman Lillard just mentioned, there are really just two pieces of new information. So since we met in November, the state has appropriated the money through the General Assembly and the budgeting process for that $17 million, as well as a 3% salary increase for salaries at our campuses. That, in addition to what has recently been the Fair Labor Standards Act, which was what was referenced by Chairman Lillard, would potentially have an effect on over 3,200 employees across the higher education enterprise, estimating something at the maximum around $28 million. This would require the campuses to move potentially those salaried individuals up to the new minimum, which I have referenced here on this slide. Currently, we are at $36 million as the, or $36 million, excuse me, $36,000 is the minimum salary in which individuals are exempt from overtime. According to the new Department of Labor rules, effective July 1st, we would see that increase to $43,000, approximately $44,000, and then January 1st up to just over $58,000. Again, this would potentially impact 3,200 employees across the enterprise. Campuses, however, are really thinking about this on an individual basis. So they're really evaluating who on their staff would be affected by this and does work any overtime, whether they would continue to work that overtime or just pay overtime, whether they would increase that salary to this point. But they're really trying to maximize and continue to offer the student services at the level that they are under this guidance. And so while the official timing of all of this has been laid out here, there were some questions in the committee about the potential delay or rollout of that, and at this time we really don't have any further information on that point, but this is a consideration that our campuses are grappling with as they budget for this upcoming year.
I would just add to that, thank you very much, Amanda. Just added that we did hear from institutions about 3 weeks ago. This was on our radar, and it's on, I think, every employer's radar right now. We have a handful of employees that fall below that current wage right now as well, and so it was on our radar. But and we had, I know President Nolan reached out to me a few weeks ago asking us, if this was on our radar to the extent it was for higher education. Higher education institutions do have about 80% of their budget is dedicated to personnel. I will say this as a former admission and financial aid counselor. I know that positions like that, student-facing positions, tend to be below or near below where this minimum is where it's going on January 1st. And so our institutions can be hit pretty substantially here. However, on the other side of that coin is we do not know if this will be delayed. We can honestly put bets on whether or not it will be delayed. It's been delayed in the past when I think back in 2016 or 2017, this was being rolled out then under a different administration. It was delayed then too. So, but the information we have right now is that this is hitting July 1 and then January 1 as well. In partnership with this request to look into here, we did receive a formal letter as well from Chancellor Tidings of Tennessee Board of Regents asking us to speak to the fact that our tuition model itself, this is way back in November when we presented to you. We have a tuition model that's been in place here for some time, and what that tuition model does is essentially look at what a range would be if our goal was to keep revenue per student at the same level, taking into consideration inflation, enrollment patterns, discount rates on campuses as well, state appropriations moving in. I'll say this, for those assumptions that went into that model, the assumptions, except for this change in the Fair Labor Standards Act, have remained constant. We did receive the appropriations that were as an assumption in that model. Inflation has held relatively steady from where it was. It's gone down a little bit, jumping up and down over the time. And that range did come at a 0 to 6% range to fit all institutions in Tennessee into one range. That range does not dictate where the commission goes by any means. It does not take into consideration student affordability pushes from the state or from institutions. And the board, of course, did land on 0 to 4% then. As far as, again, the assumptions that went into that model, nothing has changed with that regard. I just wanted to speak to that and highlight that request here.
And I'll just quickly add too, we were requested to update the attachment 2 that was in your materials to reflect what this would look like. So the first several columns reflecting what is in the public materials, and then the remaining columns reflect what the potential revenue would be related to the tuition increase, and as Stephen mentioned, what it would look like to be revenue neutral for some of our campuses, accounting for that inflationary need and holding enrollment stable. Everyone should also have a copy in front of them.
Treasurer?
Madam Chair, I just want to add a couple of things to what's been said here. Number one, the committee did not take lightly the fact that the original guiding range was 0 to 4%, and the expansion to 5.5% was something that we looked at quite a bit and talked about and discussed. And, you know, obviously it's not an invitation to raise tuition to the maximum of that range automatically, but as has been alluded to this morning here, there's disparate impact, the possibility of that between different institutions, and to give them the flexibility necessary to get through this rate setting or tuition setting season going forward, but to do so with the mindfulness of, I'm sure the commission will want everybody to understand that we're trying to be as economical as possible with increases in tuition. That said, I would like to also, on behalf of the committee, call on the THEC staff and on the universities and community colleges staff to take a hard look at monitoring the effect on their institutions of this overtime regulation. As someone alluded to, there may be court action where the effectiveness that is delayed for a long time, or it may go into effect as planned fairly soon. So from that standpoint, I would like to know, and I know the committee and the commission probably like to know, what the actual effect of these changes were in practice per institution, so we could more effectively gauge this in the future. And lastly, we're going to, I think as a committee, be further digging into our tuition model and to our ranges that we adopt in the future to make sure that they are viable and appropriate given not only the needs of the institution, but also the need to supply as economical a tuition requirement as possible for students. Thank you, Madam. With that, Madam Chair, I'll move adoption of the guiding of the banding ranges of 0 to 5.5%.
Second.
Any questions, any discussion, please?
Thank you, Madam Chair.
You want to press the button so it turns red.
Couple things to the treasurer. If the information that we've been presented this morning had not come forward, we had established last fall the range that we felt comfortable with. Is this the primary driver to why we felt, as the committee, and I'm sorry I wasn't able to attend that meeting, that the necessary change?
Yes, it is. And also, of course, influential was the letter from Dr. Tidings, the Chancellor of the Board of Regents, that pointed out our tuition model would yield a result that would be more like 0 to 6%, you know. And this is an area that I think, and the committee, I think, believes this, the members are here and can speak up to this. I think we need to delve more deeply into this area and be better prepared in the next cycle for this situation that may occur in the future of our tuition model indicating one thing and the binding range ended up being something different, you know. I think we owe it to everybody to have a better explanation for how that occurs.
Given that, is there a reason why we have to do this today, or will we be better served to see what happens with this if it is enacted or postponed?
Well, some of the other people can speak up that may be better qualified than I am, but, you know, being a budget officer myself, you know, I think it's time to set tuition ranges at the community college and college level in Tennessee now, anticipation of the fall semester and everything. So they need to move ahead with their calculations and their ranges, and we need to give them the authority to do that. I think the key to this, though, Commissioner Matlock, is, again, we're relying on our institutions of the higher education systems in Tennessee to be prudent and to be fair and be efficient about any increases that they may see that are necessary in tuition, and make sure that they are fully justified in doing that, because we can and will be looking at that in hindsight ourselves, and so will the public, about how much is actually charged in the end. And it was just felt by the committee, I think, Commissioner Matlock, that in light of this rather sudden major requirement by the federal government, and you see from some of the numbers that staff has provided here, it can have a very big impact on an institution to give them the ability to work within an expanded range for this year, and probably for this year only, in light of these circumstances.
Any further discussion? Yes, Comptroller?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the Treasurer Lillard, who is chairman of the committee. We had a great discussion about this issue in the committee, and I fully support the range as proposed. I do think we need to do it right now. But I also think, for the first time in a long time, this provides an opportunity for our institutions across the state to demonstrate prudence in their planning. With the 0 to 5.5% range, it may be that not every institution needs to use that full range. Again, this body has for years, in effect, been setting tuition by setting a very restrictive range. In opening this range up a little bit more, we may see institutions that use all 5.5%, but we also may see institutions that use 5% or even 4%. And our responsibility is to provide a range, not set tuition for institutions that are geographically spread across a very long state, that experience different market conditions from institution to institution. So I'm going to be very interested in looking at how each institution debates what the best tuition rate is for their institution. I'm going to be looking, particularly as we do this in the future, back to see what kind of cost controls they can demonstrate they put into place, as opposed to just raising the rate higher than they should. If the overtime rule is delayed or not implemented, money they programmed to meet that need, is that money then being returned? Lots of things will come into play in my mind, but I think this is an appropriate range to do this year. And one thing we rob our institutions of that thinking about it from a business practice, I mean, by having this binding range every year, we rob our institutions of the ability to do long-term financial planning, because they can't forecast from year to year what this binding range is going to be. I can't think of a business that would operate that way, with blinders as to any long-term financial planning. So the committee discussed this thoroughly, and I think we've come to a really nice spot for the range this year. And again, to the institutions that are represented here today, one question that I'm going to have for you in the future is how you decided, where you're going to land on your tuition rate this year, what cost controls you put into place, and some of these outside factors, whether this labor rule goes into effect or not, how you utilize that money. So I was glad to second the treasurer's motion to adopt this and reiterate my support. Thank you.
Please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And to the comptroller, if we followed that point, what accountability do we as a board then have to say if everybody rolls it right up to the top, 5.5? Based on your point, and I agree with it, how then do we have some control over those who are efficient, those who spend really prudently, and those who don't? What controls are there?
Thank you very much. And I guess my first response to that is, I believe the legislature intended for those controls to be with the individual boards of trustees that govern our institutions. I believe that's what they meant to do when they passed the Focus Act and created gubernatorially nominated, legislatively confirmed individual boards of trustees. I don't believe it is this board's responsibility to set the tuition rate. I think, again, it is our responsibility to set a range for them to operate in. So I think at some point in time, we have to have a degree of faith in what the legislature created and intended to be the way universities and community colleges and TCATs are run across this state. However, I understand your question and would say we do have the ability this time next year when we're setting another binding range to be more restrictive in that if we see that our institutions haven't handled this very well. And so that's why I said, this time next year when we're setting the next binding range, I'm going to be asking, and I hope it's demonstrated, what kind of cost controls did you put into place? What point did you pick in the range where you set your tuition? And this labor rule, if it does not go into effect, how did you handle that? And so it will be a year from now that we have the opportunity to set another binding range, and there's a lot to watch and see between now and then. But I think we can't hesitate past today in setting this range, again, because for business practices, for student recruiting and other things that are happening live right now, we've got to provide this key financial tool. So I hope that answers your question. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll be quick. Commissioner Matlock, I don't like the suddenness of it either. I will wholeheartedly agree with what the treasurer has said earlier, and I don't think we have to wait a year, though. I think that when the legislature comes back in during the next session, there's budget hearings, and there's going to be ample opportunity for higher education to answer questions about how they determine what rate they would be at. I think this commission over the last decade has really demonstrated that it wants to err on the side of accessibility and keep tuition as low as possible. I think, frankly, our institutions have understood that sometimes the difference between 2% and 3% or 0%, 2%, what they get from that increase, the juice isn't worth the squeeze. So I think they will be very thoughtful about what type of increase they will have to have inside that range. But I do think because of the scale of different budgets, but the disparate impact of this rule, some do have to have a little more flexibility than what they would have from 0 to 4. So, Commissioner, I'm not happy about it, but I think given the alternative of them not having this flexibility, I think that would do more damage. So I'm going to vote for it.
Any other question or discussion? Okay, we have a motion and a second on the table. Madam Secretary?
Chairwoman Scarlett,
Aye.
Commissioner Allman,
Aye.
Commissioner Cope,
Aye.
Commissioner Coben, Commissioner Matlock, Commissioner Wharton, Secretary Hargett, Treasurer Lillard,
Aye.
Comptroller Mumpower. Chairwoman, you have 8 ayes and 1 nay.
Okay, thank you. Motion carries. Our next item on the agenda are the 8 new academic programs. Commissioner Winton has resigned from THEC. She is going to serve on her alma mater's board, Tennessee State University. So she's no longer with us, unfortunately, which means she's not the chair of the Access, Academics, and Student Success Committee. I've asked Dr. Julie Roberts who's our Chief Academic Officer, to provide an overview of the agenda item and the committee's recommendations. You're recognized.
Thank you. I'm going to give a very quick summary, and so obviously if you have any questions, please let me know. We heard from 4 campuses yesterday regarding the approval of 8 new academic programs, 5 of which were Bachelor's of Science programs, 2 master's programs, and 1 doctoral degree. First, we heard from Dr. Kimberly McCorkle at ETSU regarding a proposed Master of Music, followed by Dr. Stephen Shanklin at TSU regarding a proposed Business Data Analytics Master of Science. And then also from TSU, we heard from Dr. Ronald Barreto about their proposed PhD in Public Health. Next, we heard from Dr. Lori Bruce at TTU, who provided an overview of the proposed Nuclear Engineering Bachelor of Science. And then we heard a lot from Dr. John Zomchik, who presented us 4 programs at the University of Tennessee, Knoxville, which those 4 programs were data science, applied artificial intelligence, innovative transdisciplinary studies, and environmental engineering. We did have a robust discussion around topics such as resource allocations, ensuring quality instruction in quickly changing technology fields, industry engagement via advisory boards and partnerships, alignment with K-12 programs, among many other things. So that's a quick overview. All 8 programs were unanimously recommended for approval. And I did want to say thank you to our campus partners that came and joined us yesterday as well.
Thank you, Dr. Roberts. Any questions or comments about this recommendation? Hearing none, looking for a second, or sorry, a motion and a second. Okay. Madam Secretary. Please, yes.
Madam Chair, I just would welcome other members of the commission to come and hear some of the robust conversation that's occurring on these programs. And I'll try and do a better job of also attending the other committee meetings. I think I would have benefited from coming to the Treasurer's Committee recently. But we're spending a lot of time. Yesterday, we talked a lot about trying to figure out how we can speed up our processes, but also, most importantly, how we can help students across the state speed up their ability to get from point A to point B in our system of higher education. And that's going to be a pretty big conversation. And I'm looking forward to employers weighing in on what their real market needs are, and looking really forward to the conversation of how we can help navigate that and hopefully be a leader in this nation about how we can help get these students through faster with still productive and quality degrees.
And I'll just tag on to that. As the Secretary was talking about kind of speeding the process, I think there's some questions we had specifically with UT Knoxville is how do you bring some of the programs into the K-12 system? So things like data analytics, artificial intelligence, these are moving at an astronomical pace. And our students in K-12 can be best served as thinking about and being inspired and motivated to go into the programs that our post-secondary universities and colleges are providing, especially in these fast-growing fields. Any further discussion from yesterday?
Madam Chair?
Yes.
Question, really. Thank you very much. What is, as we continue to work on this issue, what is our goal for timeline for academic program approval? What is our overall, do we have a goal in mind? It should, I mean, I understand every program is different. Do we have an overarching guiding premise, though, of it should take no longer than blank?
I'd ask Dr. Roberts to share where we are right now in that speeding of the timeline.
Yeah, thank you. We anticipate with our new process that we presented in January to get that down to as little as 3 months. We do have some maximums built into our policy where if a campus is taking a very long time from time of proposal to us getting through the documentation, they do expire. And so obviously we don't want that to happen, but that does happen from time to time. But we're really focused on, from our perspective, if everything goes smoothly, how quickly could it go through? And so our goal there is as little as 3 months.
Thank you. And if there is a campus that comes and says, we are trying to meet a very specific workforce need with an emerging industry in our region, what is in place to see that, that could be addressed perhaps more quickly or out of order or jump the line or if you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, no, and we have a couple mechanisms. A full degree program does have to go through the the full process. However, if a campus wants to stand up a certificate, they could do that today. And Katie on my team's super fast, and so she would have it approved and in the API, as long as we have all the pieces, really within a day or two. So we have mechanisms for if there's an urgent need, they can come in with a short-term credential and get it on our API and approved quickly. We also have, if a campus wants to build in a concentration, that's also just a notification to us. So there are some mechanisms that's not a full program where campuses can be very nimble.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, wanted to, first of all, I will touch on a couple of the points you made on K-12, but I wanted to ask, in terms of that, if there's an emerging need like that the comptroller is mentioning, are there also processes in place where existent programs, perhaps across university or at another partner institution, could they partner in the short term to make those things happen on an immediate basis while you still go through the due diligence process that goes on? Because one of the things I know in traveling around the nation that we've had to be proud of is the tremendous partnerships in between our higher education institutions, where the goal is what's best for Tennessee. And that's been something to be proud of, because you can go to a lot of states and watch the different institutions kind of do their best to elbow each other and try to get the other one out of the way, whereas we have a pretty good history of that partnership. Could you talk a little bit about how that looks?
Sure, thank you. So a couple thoughts. One, campuses can be building individually or in collaboration with other institutions pipelines, right? So a lot of these programs, if we're thinking about a more traditional four-year degree, there's an on-ramp that they can be building before a whole program is put into place. I think about transfer pathways, a lot of articulation and transfer agreements. So thinking about working with TCATs or community colleges into four-year degrees. There's a lot of partnerships. These are more established, but where we've got pipelines all the way from community college up to graduate and doctoral programs. So that on-ramping and building those pipelines and stacking the credentials along the way. So if we know that we want to build up something, nuclear is top of mind lately, we know that maybe there's some credentials we can do quickly along the way as we're building a full program.
And that it could be from one institution but worked in conjunction with another. That's been something that I think the rest of the country has noticed when we've done that before. To Madam Chairman, your comments regarding K-12, I will say that certainly from the State Board of Education's perspective, we're doing our best to try to allow for greater flexibility on that side. And as many of you know, it's a little difficult sometimes to get K-12 education to be somewhat more flexible, but there are a lot of steps going on in that direction, one of which is, at our board meeting shortly, we're going to be taking up this issue of 4 credit hours of math being able to be done over a 3-year period of time. And also there was legislation that passed this year that has us, TDOE, and quite noticeably the Higher Education Commission working on potential alternatives on the Algebra 2 side to say what's considered strong, academically rigorous, but also appropriate for a lot of different potential futures for our students, because there's so many different professions where statistics or other options are probably somewhat more appropriate. And that having been said, I mean, we're very committed to not going back to the days where a student was either on a tech track or college prep track, but to say, let's preserve those options every step of the way. And so looking forward, as always, to a continued partnership there with Higher Education Commission.
Comptroller, I have to tell you that all the UTK programs that were approved yesterday were all approved by their governing board at the beginning of March. And so I think that speed to market for something that they have just stood up says a lot about the work that THEC has been doing, and also I think in partnership, I know in partnership with the institutions.
and that's excellent and appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you, THEC. Thank you, Dr. Roberts, really.
Thank you.
So we have a motion and a second on the floor. Any other conversation, discussion about this topic? Madam Secretary?
Chairwoman Scarlett,
Aye.
Commissioner Allman,
Aye.
Commissioner Cope,
Aye.
Commissioner Coben, Commissioner Matlock, Commissioner Wharton, Secretary Hargit, Treasurer Lillard,
Aye.
Comptroller Mudpower. Chairwoman, you have 9 ayes.
Motion carries. Also aligned with the Access Academics and Student Success Committee, I'd like to propose that commission's approval, that Commissioner Allman be added to that committee. If there's no questions or objections, I will entertain a motion and a second. Madam Secretary?
Chairwoman Scarlett,
Aye.
Commissioner Allman,
Aye.
Commissioner Cope,
Aye.
Commissioner Coben, Commissioner Matlock, Commissioner Wharton, Secretary Hargit, Treasurer Lillard,
Aye.
Comptroller Mudpower. Chairwoman, you have 9 ayes.
Wonderful, thank you so much. Motion carries. I have to say, I'm very appreciative for this rich discussion this morning. It's certainly been an interesting year so far. I'm very lucky, I think, to have Dr. Gentile as our permanent director. He has spent a lot of time rebuilding relationships across the state with institutions, with legislators, with other external partners, and resetting the foundation and rebuilding trust of THEC. And so for that, I think we're all very appreciative of that. I do want to share a few key highlights that I don't know will fully come up today, but THEC, specifically Dr. Roberts, in partnership with the institutions, have condensed this program approval timeline. And I appreciate Comptroller Mudpower bringing this up because I do think it's really important. We've been talking about it for a while. And this condensing is without sacrificing strong program review. And as you can see from the requests we just reviewed and what I just mentioned, there's been a lot of changes in a short period of time. I believe the 2024 version, which Dr. Roberts just mentioned, will reduce the time even further to 3 to 6 months, which from letter of, what do they call it, letter of notification to the commission to the point of approval. And so I have high hopes and expectations that we'll be moving forward to make it a lot easier to help all institutions be able to address any workforce needs that are necessary in a shorter period of time. The second thing, Dr. Gentile launched the Capital Task Force in December of last year, which is currently reviewing an updated and more streamlined year-over-year capital approval process. And it's going to be reviewed in the coming weeks. And I think it'll plan on being implemented this year if approved. Is that correct?
Absolutely. We're going for an early June launch right now.
Perfect. The third thing I'd like to call out is a headline from the Tennessean from last week. $207 million and 150,000 students. Tennessee Promise Scholarship marks the 10-year anniversary. That's pretty impressive, and I believe that we were the first state in the union to do a program like this. 150,000 students that were supported by Tennessee Promise since 2014. And I hear for the second year in a row, we've had the largest number of applicants. This year alone, we've had 66,000 high school seniors apply for Tennessee Promise, which I think is spectacular, especially if they're able to complete. One thing that Tennessee Promise students have the opportunity to do is go to a community college, and they can transfer. There's 69 different Tennessee transfer pathways that allow community college students to transfer to a 4-year program. Unfortunately, we have hundreds of barriers. Some people call them footnotes, asterisks, whatever you want to call them. But we've created barriers. And Tracy Comer, who sits on Dr. Roberts' team, is spending a lot of time trying to break down work with the institutions to break away those barriers so we can really help streamline the experience for a student taking advantage of the Tennessee Promise, then going on to get a bachelor's degree if he or she chooses to do that. I applaud that sort of work because we need to be able to try to make this as easy as possible for our students. And even though I think today we're celebrating a decade of success with Tennessee Promise, there's still opportunities to improve that program and remove barriers, which I hope to see coming sooner than later. These and other changes whether that's programs, capital, whether it's tuition discussions, whether it's Tennessee transfer pathways, can be easily addressed when THEC and institutions work together. Open line conversations, and really working proactively for continuous improvement. Just because we set a program in place doesn't mean we can't improve it on a regular basis. And I recognize I don't sit in the government world or in higher education world per se, but it's not a once and done. We need to consistently be looking at how do we improve what we're doing for our students and for our institutions. I truly believe that we're in a new era. Under new leadership with Dr. Gentile and team, we can set Tennessee on an ever-evolving path for collective success. Right now, Tennessee has 56 available workers for 100 jobs. Every student counts. Every program, every pathway counts. We need to focus our efforts on high-quality, high-demand career pathways that set every student, every institution, and every employer up for success. The workforce gap is forcing some employers to seek alternative pathways to fill the jobs. And innovative strategies are spurring in post-secondary institutions every single day, in Tennessee and also at a national level. But speed to market, which Secretary Hargett mentioned earlier, without removing the quality of the credential, is an evolved model in Tennessee that I believe all institutions should continue to explore. We have a ton of great things going on in Tennessee, but we also want to hear it from Dr. Gentile, so I'll pass this on to you.
Thank you, Chairwoman Scarlett. Again, it's always an honor to be in front of you today, as well as our colleagues and friends from institutions and other walks of life here today. I want to recognize we have President Licari here from Austin Peay State University. Good to see you, sir. President Phil Oldham from Tennessee Tech University. We're going to hear later from President Brian Noland of ETSU, East Tennessee State University. And I've asked him to come and speak to the commission today for our institution report, but also to touch base on how the FAFSA rollout is hurting institutions on the ground. We are very much entrenched in that right now, and other things as well. So thank you, Dr. Noland. As I look around the room and continue to call out people, I got two more I want to look at. President Claude Presnell of TECUA is here. Good to see you, sir. And we got Patrick Sheehy as well of the Tennessee Business Roundtable in the audience too. Great to see you too as well. Going on to further recognize people. It's kind of time to recognize Jacob Knight here, the student commissioner. Can you please stand, Jacob? About 2 weeks ago, Commissioner Knight called me on a Sunday morning at 10:30 a.m. I knew something was up, and he said, I got good news and bad news. The good news is I've been offered a full-time job at Austin Peay. The bad news is it starts tomorrow. I think that means I can't serve. I'm like, that sounds right. Let me clarify with the person I called immediately after that, which is Scott, to make sure, and we confirmed that. I'll say it here. Scott said, is there any way he could push that 2 weeks? I was like, no, we're not going to do that. He's going to be the Assistant Director of Alumni Engagement. Is that right, sir? At Austin Peay. And as you said, you're basically now getting paid for the GA that you've been doing in the past, and he's going to facilitate helping sow the seeds for giving among current students and do events as well. But I just want to recognize you, sir. Thank you very much. Would you like to address the commission?
Yes, I would. Commission, thank you so much for the opportunity to serve. Thank you to Governor Bill Lee for appointing me. It's been an absolute honor. I'm sorry I had to leave a little bit early, but this is the profession that I want to work in. I want to help students achieve their dreams, and part of that is helping them pay for school. And that's one way that I'm able to do this through this new position at Austin Peay. I always wear my Austin Peay pin because I'm very proud of my alma mater, so I'm really excited for that opportunity. I want to extend a thank you to the THEC staff as well for their support in my term as commissioner, and thank you so much, and I look forward to watching meetings on Zoom in the future.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
He also told me that he intends to actually attend the next commission meeting should there be a new student commissioner by then. And we do have some in the pipeline for that, finalists for that. He wants to help perhaps onboard that next student commissioner. So I appreciate you offering to do that, sir. Thank you. I also want to recognize Commissioner DeCasha Winton. As Chairwoman Scarlett mentioned earlier, she has resigned to go on to Tennessee State University's board. She now serves on the chair. She's not here today. We'll recognize her another time in person, but she's now serving as the board of the new TSU governing board as well. And they've had now 2 meetings. They'll have another meeting in a couple of weeks, I believe, May 29. We have been a part of those meetings and those deliberations as we work to onboard that new board. We'll go in front of them again the day before their June commission meeting to help with the training there. But she will be missed, and we're grateful for her service that she provided here as well. And then lastly, I want to recognize 3 new personnel. If you're in the audience, please stand. Stone Watson, Robert Dunham, and David Haggard. I'll spend a moment here on Stone. Stone is the new fiscal policy analyst, but he was an intern before, a man after my own heart. Glad that you're here today, Stone. He hails from North Carolina as well. Really glad that you're here. And then Robert Dunham has joined Policy Planning and Research, coming from Mississippi as a research analyst there. And then David Haggard. David Haggard is new to our financial aid audit team. He is a former director of financial aid, and he's going to be deployed across the state in many ways to help institutions be sure that they can navigate the financial aid process that we have here. Then one more personnel moment I want to take here is to recognize and just say that we lost one of our colleagues over the last weekend, Marcy Mills. She was a paralegal on our staff. She had worked for THEC, legal, the Division of Post-Secondary Authorization, and most recently with Julie Woodruff here on our state authorization reciprocity. There's many things that we could say about Marcy. First and foremost, she was ever ebullient, joyful to see her around. She was probably worked a little too hard, if we're all honest. We're getting some nods there. We had to tell her, it's time to put this down for a little while. And when you think about people who touch your agency in many ways outside of the profession, it is, what attitude do they bring? Who do they lift up while they're around? And that was Marcy. Later today, a handful of us will be going up to Springfield for her memorial service, her funeral, and just looking forward to being with her family. She's got 5 children, 4 adult children, and a stepson as well. And we were just thinking about her and praying for her and her husband, John, as well. Thinking about the last few months since we met, I just want to give you some updates on where we're headed right now as an organization. We've had, I'd say, a lot of different things going on that are bettering us and strengthening us, and we're going to continue working on that going forward too. About 2 weeks ago, we had an all-staff meeting, brought everyone in to identify our strategic goals and how we need to operate internally to make sure that we're operating as we need to. I put in front of them a vision that day of who we need to be as an agency. And that vision is simply that it is our role to cultivate a cohesive higher education enterprise that fosters solutions to ensure student success, build strong communities, and improve the lives of Tennesseans. And the reason why we've centered on that as our guiding vision and how we operate internally is because I want to be sure that THEC does not need to lead and should not lead on every higher education element that happens in the state. But THEC needs to be seen as a valuable resource and one that brings together partners so that we can provide that one cohesive picture for higher education for our stakeholders when they look on what higher education needs, that we have a cohesive voice on that. An example of that is not to have 8 or 9 different financial aid policies that institutions are pushing for from one year to the next, but to have one shared vision on what we can do together. And so I asked our staff, like, what do we need to do? What do you need to do? Divisions, your bureaus, to make sure that we can do that. And we've developed as well with that the starting point of a strategic plan, internal strategic plan that we brought on the CFG, Customer Focused Government, that does this for all the 23 cabinet agencies, work on an internal strategic plan. We had a retreat, the senior staff did, at Paris Landing State Park, a beautiful facility, by the way, back in early April. And we're still developing that strategic plan, but we highlighted 4 specific goals to help guide us going forward. One was to cultivate a cohesive higher education enterprise. And what we mean by that, again, is being sure that when there's a higher education need, we are there for it, but we're also setting the stage to allow for good conversations to happen. I have turned to Amanda Clefane as my right-hand person to help think through this and naming her our Chief Strategy Officer to be sure that we are constantly looking outward and helping and supporting our colleagues across the street, the cabinet agencies, the institutions, bringing together towards a shared goal and shared vision. 2, strengthen relationship with key stakeholders was a number 2 goal that came up from that strategic plan. And by key stakeholders, we of course mean the administration, the General Assembly, this body, our boards that we have, our public boards that we have, our institutions and our higher education advocacy groups, really anyone who touches higher education or has an interest, we want to build on the relationships that we have and make sure that they know what is going on and what the needs are of the students, of Tennesseans and communities as well. Looking forward to developing that more going forward. We are creating a new bureau to make sure that we can do that, moving Lou Hanneman over as Chief of External Relations, where comms will be, communications will be, as well as government relations. And I'm also going to have one of my colleagues take on more fully making sure that we have good convenings, solid convenings that bring organizations together, make sure that those are running well. 3, enhance the THEC, TSAC employee experience. We want to work on our culture, our office culture, making sure that our employees get what they need and that they are being fulfilled in their role here and that we're all able to meet our overarching goals. There'll be more developing there going forward, but to make sure that we are constantly looking at this and that I prioritize this, I am shifting David Hethcock, our Director of HR, and his team to be directly on my staff, my leadership team, so that we can think together on how to improve our agency and the personnel and how they are connected to our organization. And then last but not least, to improve our operational performance. When I interviewed in front of you back in November, an observation I had then, and that's been shared by others, is that we still have policies and procedures internally that operate as though we are a 35-member staff. That was true. One time we were, but then we added on the Division of Post-Secondary Authorization. We added on TSAC. We added on Advise, TN, Navigate, Reconnect to have well over 130 staff that are part of our agency. With that comes new ways of doing things, new ways of operating internally to make sure that we are efficient and effective and that our staff that are here to meet those other 3 goals, our mission as an agency, that they are able to do so effectively. There are many people on our staff who are going to help me with this, Jason Cavender being one, David Hethcock of our HR director, but someone that I also continuously look to and turn to help internal operations in that regard, whether it's working on our commission meeting logistics or thinking through how we navigate various different processes has been Scott Sloan. And so I've asked him to put that hat on to help us think of our internal procedures to make sure that we can run more efficiently and effectively as an organization. So thank you, Scott, for that. Then one more personnel note is that I recognize the need for us to, going back to number 1, our cohesive higher education enterprise, to be sure that you are all connected as you would want to be with higher education and institutions in your backyard and your divisions. And also to be sure that we continuously are helping support our institutions and their boards on their needs going forward. I have asked for Dr. Victoria Harpole. Victoria, are you here today? Hello. I've asked for Dr. Victoria Harpole to shift her responsibilities ever so slightly and take on the role of Senior Director of Strategic Engagement. What this means is that she will help me identify what your needs are and what you want from higher education and be sure that you are connected properly to that. That we are, when we're traveling the state, if there's an opportunity in your backyard, that we're going to invite you to make sure that you're coming as well if you would like to see what's happening. She's also going to serve as a main liaison to our board secretaries at our institutions to identify what do you need from the state to help you and your board. Her liaisons will not be the board itself. It will be the board secretaries to help us out with that regard. We need to strengthen our relationships again to build that cohesive relationship. I do want to take a moment to recognize what an example of this could be for us going forward. About a month ago, I had an opportunity to, I drove from Northeast Tennessee, meeting with President Noland and Accord at Northeast State and others, all the way to Lake County in Western Tennessee the very next day to go to our Northwest Corrections Complex. And we have, as a state, a couple of institutions, TCAT Community College and Lane College at the very least, offering degrees and credentials there. I really wanted to see it in action, and I got to, and it was a wonderful visit. But also accompanying me was Commissioner Allman. Whitney Allman came as well, and I know that her eyes were open too. And I want to ask Commissioner Allman, do you have do you want to talk about that visit real quickly?
Sure, I'd love to. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. So good morning, everybody. I apologize that I cannot be there in person, but I had a 1 o'clock appointment and knew I couldn't make it back to West Tennessee in time. Dr. Gentile and I had the opportunity to visit the Northwest Correctional Complex in mid-April. We spent several hours with the Department of Correction and THEC staff there, along with several individuals who are currently incarcerated. So to give you a brief overview of our visit, I was thinking about kind of our day that day. We began with introductions and toured the facilities, observed many who were actively participating in classes with their teachers, discussed projects that they were working on in several of the vocational classes, such as welding, carpentry. But most important, we listened to 3 men share their testimony about how education has impacted and changed their lives. So I think I can speak for both of us, Dr. Gentile and myself, in saying that we were both wowed. When we were on our way home, I think most of our discussion on the way home was about our visit and just how wonderful the experience was. So I'd like to take a minute and say thank you again to those who took their time that day to help us better understand and see firsthand what we are doing to help those in our prison system, to help those individuals gain confidence and knowledge through our efforts, so really one day they can become hopefully a better member of society. Dr. Miley, and I don't have these statistics here with me, but she shared some statistics that day regarding the rate of recidivism. And I don't recall them specifically, but the one thing that she did say, and as we were talking about, the more certifications that one receives or degrees achieved, the lower the rate. So in fact, no one, and correct me if I'm wrong, Dr. Gentile, but no one who has graduated with a college degree has gone back into the judicial system. Lastly, one very crucial piece that I quickly recognized that day was that while we have the tools such as technology in place for those incarcerated, the materials, of course, learning to weld, most importantly, we have the navigators who probably play one of the most important roles in making this program work. The reentry navigators through Tennessee Reconnect Reentry are the ones who work alongside those currently in the prison system to reach and achieve their dreams to become better, to one day be gainfully employed, simply giving them that support through education. So one of the takeaways that impacted me personally was that one of the 3 men who spoke at the end of our visit was incarcerated at the age of 15. He shared that for the first 10 years, he had no interest in education. However, after working with the navigators and the correctional staff, he graduated with an associate's degree from Dyersburg State Community College in 2022, I believe. He is an avid reader. He shared a famous quote with us that has impacted his life, and that is from one from Oscar Wilde. It is, "We are all in the gutter, but some of us are looking at the stars." And that, for me, was impactful. He talked about his ceremony, and the ceremony is actually online, and I encourage each of you to maybe Google that and watch that if you have not already. I will say I've even got a little teary-eyed hearing him speak, but his words were so impactful. Again, I do appreciate the opportunity. I appreciate Dr. Gentile making that trek from East Tennessee to West Tennessee and back to Middle. But I do look forward to another visit in the near future, to visit another campus in our state and learn more about how we can continue to improve and provide those educational opportunities for all.
Thank you, Commissioner Allman. I really do appreciate that. And I don't need the thanks. I'm traveling the state. It's what I love to do. And I just want to thank you for coming along. And I offer and invite you all to come along with me as well. I will not force you to give a presentation on it in the future. But thank you, Commissioner Allman, for speaking to that. And next Tuesday, we have, I believe, Commissioner Coben, if you're able to attend that, going to Turney Center here in Middle Tennessee. Jessica asked me if you're interested in going next Tuesday there, that we still have opportunity to get you guys on the agenda if you let us know today for that. Again, thank you all. I want to end this presentation real quick, and thank you for your time on it, to highlight a number of initiatives that we got going on that we should celebrate. We have won a couple of grants that will have our policy planning and research team very much engaged in evaluation on what we've got going on, and then also thinking towards the future. To that latter point, Complete College America has given us a 2-year partnership with them to help identify key performance indicators, to help identify data points for leading indicators and real-time indicators that should be addressed and centered on a vision that charts the path forward for higher education. This is something that we've been wanting to put together for some time with dashboards on our website to track how are we doing as a state in higher education beyond the fact book that we have or books of facts that we have across our agency, and more focusing on key measures to see how we're progressing as a state. So very excited for that, and that is a cross-agency endeavor, not just policy planning and research, as we have financial aid a part of that, academic affairs, access and outreach, and student aid and compliance as well. We've also have won a very competitive grant on the IES federal grant, where they gave out 5 for this past round, and we are partnering with the University of Michigan, longtime partners with us, to investigate the Hope Scholarship. In addition to this being the 10-year anniversary of Tennessee Promise, it's also 20 years since the Hope Scholarship was put into place, back when Dr. Brian Nolan was here working in PPR here, academic affairs here at THEC, and under his leadership then. Our IES grant will look at nearly every element of the Hope Scholarship lottery program to be sure that it is doing what it is intended to do, to identify opportunities for reform on that scholarship as well, looking at how well it leads to good jobs going forward too. And then to highlight just my involvement that's external to the state, I'm a part of 3 different initiatives right now that I'm really looking forward to, that I've chosen strategically to help us move forward as an agency, but also to address what I see and what we all see as a growing disenchantment, if you will, with higher education, that I believe takes more than just highlighting how the wage premiums with college degrees affect you. First and foremost, next Monday and Tuesday, I'm going to be up in Indiana for the Civic Learning and Democratic Engagement Conference. This is in partnership with SHIO, my professional organization at the statewide level. And we've got partners with me going up there from Kentucky, Texas, Louisiana, and other states to think about how higher education can progress forward from a state level on building in civic learning. I was inspired, honestly, by the work that's happening at UT Knoxville with the Baker Center, Baker College now, and what they're doing in the space to help make sure that we're having good dialogue on campuses and that higher education is meant to progress forward productive conversations. 2, I've been a part of, this is actually internal to Tennessee, I'm a number of partners here in this room as well with SCORE. The organization SCORE has a quality credentials working group working over this next year to identify where should the state go with quality credentials and how we name quality credentials. What is quality and how can that be used to drive policy? We're right now in the early stages of it, but this is an intentional move on our part, no matter where this goes, but to be sure that we are aligning academic programs with workforce alignment. We have a bureau dedicated to that. In fact, we now have the newly named Bureau, Academic Affairs and Workforce Alignment, where our workforce team and academic programs come together. This will help us move that conversation forward in partnership with SCORE and others in the higher ed space. And then one last one, and I've already shared this with you, but I serve along with Commissioner Lizette Reynolds of the Department of Education, and Provost Robbie Melton of Tennessee State University on an SRAB, Southern Regional Education Board panel commission that is going to be convening for the next 2 years to identify policies and practices for K-12 and higher education with regards to artificial intelligence. How can we use artificial intelligence to improve teaching and learning in both sectors, and what policies should be in place for K-12 and higher ed. The person who is chairing this panel, this commission, is Governor McMaster of South Carolina. And 2 weeks ago, I got to travel down to Columbia and got to meet with him, former Governor Asa Hutchinson of Arkansas, and a lot of statewide peers as well to have this conversation. I'll end my remarks there. Just wanted to update you on what's been happening, what's been transpiring over the last few months here. Lou Hanneman will end our meeting today with an overview of what's happened during legislative session, because despite everything that I just talked about, that definitely had my #1 attention over the last few months, as it should, as it has for all my colleagues at the state level. But I just want to end now and thank you all for your support along the way.
Thank you very much, and Stephen, thank you for the great report. I do have to point out to this commission a special thanks to Stephen and other members of THEC staff for the efforts they put forth in helping to onboard, provide training for members of the new Tennessee State University Board of Trustees. No doubt you are familiar with what's been going on at Tennessee State University, and I think it is a great, unfortunate but great day in terms of the future of Tennessee State. Governor Lee appointed a new board of trustees. Tennessee State can, should, and will be a great institution that provides a great service to the state. It has a long and storied history, and the future is bright. I do think this commission should keep a special eye on what's going on at Tennessee State, do everything we can to help Tennessee State be successful. They are still in a dire condition right now. And this new board of trustees, while I miss DeKasha Winton on this board, I'm so very delighted that she's on that board and in fact is chair of that board. I think her experience here, having been a member of THEC, will be beneficial to her. I think her life experience will be beneficial to her in that role. I'm thrilled. It is a new day, I hope, for Tennessee State, and which is something we should all be glad for. And I'm committed, my office is committed, and I hope this commission, and I know this commission is committed to helping Tennessee State be successful. And that started with the excellent board training provided by THEC staff. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. TX staff and Comptroller Mumpower's office was there as well, and so thank you for that.
Excellent, thank you. Dr. Gent, yes. No, please. Go ahead, Comptroller. I'm sorry, Commissioner Wharton, Mayor Wharton. You can talk for now.
Madam Chair, you mentioned access, which is what I think is one of our most noble callings, is access. I say that because in this particular meeting is always of particular significance to me because it comes right around the time of Brown versus Board of Education, May 17th, 19th.
Sorry, Evan and Whitney might not be able to hear you. Not speaking close to the mic.
Sorry about that. May 17th, 1954. And as the comptroller just noted about the present situation at Tennessee State, there was a time when it was even worse. Those of us who are attorneys and anybody in civics, we know that the Supreme Court is good at making rulings, but it has no way of enforcing its rulings. It's got a few people, clerks up there, but they can't send troops in. They can't send the National Guard in. And when it came to doing the right thing with respect to access to the most critical function of government, in my opinion, seeing that our children are educated, particularly about democratic institutions, that feature that sets our great nation separate and apart, and in my opinion, above most others. The Supreme Court made the ruling, but it could not really enforce the ruling. It was in rooms like this and in this commission that we brought to reality the vision of Brown versus Board of Education. And this state as a whole, I'm the senior in the room, so most of you have no idea of the leadership that this state took in Clinton, Tennessee, when the Ku Klux Klan went in and said, we're not going to have integration schools there. And this state The first in the nation said, we're not having that defiance in this state. So sometimes we may wonder, do we really make a difference what we're doing here? As a matter of fact, yesterday, my wife decided she would ride up with me. We've made this trip many times, so she said, you've been on there a long time. She said, why are you staying on there? I said, well, first of all, the governor hadn't kicked me off yet. Then I moved it to a more noble thing. And I said, well, Ruby, I'd like to think that in some way or another, we're making a difference. And we have made a difference here. Geyer litigation that went on for decades, the courts didn't resolve that issue. The issue of equal resources for Tennessee State was not a court order. It was the leadership of the Tennessee Higher Education Commission that came up with policies and formulae to make sure that never again did we go back there, all about access. So as we reflect on what are we doing here, and we pinch ourselves and ask, are we making a difference? Yes, we are making a difference. And I'm old enough to know that our decisions here touch real people. I was raised in a rural community. The most important person in that neighborhood wasn't a preacher. It was a veterinarian, because he took care of our cows and our horses and our chicken. And I wanted to be a veterinarian, like Dr. Berry. I wanted to work on cows, pigs, hogs, make them well, so folks could eat, so the hens could lay, we'd have breakfast. That's what you think of when you're a child, just surviving. And as I got ready to finish high school, I started telling my teachers that I wanted to become a veterinarian. That's all I wanted. But they said, you can't do that. What the heck you mean I can't do that? I want to help cows and pigs and chickens and farmers. Nothing controversial about that. But they said, this is Tennessee. And if you want to become a veterinarian, you got to leave your own state. Not because I was salutatorian. I had no juvenile record. I hadn't been in trouble. But there was something wrong with me. I wasn't trying to become some militant, and I just wanted to become a veterinarian. But I could not do it. I was admitted to veterinary school in Tuskegee, Alabama, which is at that time, if a black kid wanted to become a vet, you had to leave our state. But I needed $600. I didn't have it. Because of people in this room, we have made a difference. So as Brown versus Board of Education comes around, let us search deeply and ask ourselves, are we making a difference? And say to ourselves that we are making a difference, and I'm just glad to play some small role in it. Thanks for giving me the privilege of sharing that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mayor Warden. It's amazing that you went from wanting to be a vet to mayor of Memphis. It's a pretty spectacular path and an inspiration for many. Thank you very much for sharing. We really appreciate it. Next up, I'd like to recognize Dr. Brian Nolan, President of East Tennessee State University, to provide a bit of report.
And thank you, Chairman Scarlett. I just want to thank Dr. Nolan for when I called. I had a number of things I wanted him to speak to in front of today. He has a long, great history with the institution, as well as THEC and higher education policy. He served at ETSU since January 2012, so just over almost 12 and a half years now. Before that, he was head of the West Virginia Higher Education Policy Commission as CHEO there, and then, of course, before that, dating back to the late 90s here at THEC, THEC, well, THEC back then, Higher Education Commission, and research and academics in other areas too. But I just want to thank Dr. Brian Nolan for coming to speak today, providing an update on what's happening back in Johnson City.
Dr. Gentile, members of the commission, Madam Chair, thank you for the opportunity to be with you here today. Today is a meeting that, in many respects, is, I think, a reflection of the fact that I'm old. The fact that the lottery scholarship is more than 20 years in existence is hard to wrap your brain around. But as Commissioner Wharton mentioned, the things that happen in this room and with this body do make a difference. And for more than 20 years, families across the great state of Tennessee have had the opportunity to realize the benefits of post-secondary education because of the investments that have been made in the lottery scholarships and later through Promise. So as you look at the actions that you consider here, I think the recognition is that things take time, and they also take time at institutions. We're a university that was founded in 1911. We were one of 3 schools that came to being through the passage of the Normal School Act of 1909 and 1910. Those institutions are the University of Memphis, Middle Tennessee State University, and ETSU. Our founding president is the individual in this picture, Sidney Gilbreth. And at the founding of the institution on October 10th, 1911, he declared that the mission of the university was to improve the quality of life for the people of our region. And for more than 110 years, we have been focused on that mission of making a difference in the lives of the people who call East Tennessee home. The majority of the teachers, the school educators, the physicians, and the nurses in our region graduated from our institution. In fact, if you were to draw a 30-mile circle around our campus, 80% of the people with baccalaureate degrees within that circumference graduated from ETSU. So we are the driver of change within the region and continue to embody, more than 110 years later, the mission that was founded by our founding president. Just want to give you a sense of the size and scope of the institution. We have about 2,600 faculty and staff, an operating budget around $470 million. 56% of that is generated from tuition and fees, 44% from state appropriations. Earlier there was comment around FSLA, and I'll talk about that some in a minute. But the bulk of the resources at our institution go to our employees. We're a people-dependent entity. We're a service entity. So 73% of all of the resources that we expend are expended on people. And then this past year, we invested about $30 million of institutional resources in scholarships for our students. I want to just take a moment to say thank you. Over a very short period of time, you see the significant investments that the state of Tennessee has made in post-secondary education. This is not the case in other states, but it is the case here because of the leadership of Governor Lee and the leadership of THEC. So I just wanted to take a moment to thank you for the investments that have been made across the state in our post-secondary institutions. You talked earlier about the tuition and fee increases that came to bear as a result of pending changes to FSLA. This is a piece of legislation that dates back to the 1930s. It sets labor rates, it sets conditions upon which employment is based across the nation, but it has a disparate impact on higher education because of the nature of the individuals that we employ. Counselors, financial aid directors, recruiters, coaches. We have a significant number of individuals who from a salary threshold have traditionally fallen below the levels that are set by this act. The current threshold now for an individual to be exempt is $35,000. You see July 1, it moves to $43,000, and then January 1, it moves to $58,000. At the bottom of the slide, you see the impacts on East Tennessee State University. Effective July 1, if we move everyone to exempt, that's more than 100 employees, and the financial risk for us is right at $300,000. If it is implemented in January of next year, more than 500 employees will be impacted if we move them all, and the impact on us is more than $5 million collectively. To put in context the fee impacts of the actions that this body took earlier, if, and that's an if, but if we moved from 4% to 5.5%, that would generate about $1.6 million. So to fully implement FSLA, we're still looking at efficiencies of more than $3.5 million to move in this direction. So while a 1.5% fee differential is a lot to wrap your brain around from an action perspective, because I recognize this is the most difficult decision that any board makes, which is the decision to raise fees, the revenue that it would generate for our campus doesn't even cover half of the cost of FSLA. So we will take this seriously if, in fact, our board moves from the 4% range, which was presented to them in February, to what may be a different range that we'll take to the board next Friday. We'll pledge to our campus and we'll provide transparency to you and to elected officials that any revenue above the 4 went 100% to faculty and staff salaries to cover the cost associated here. One thing I will note is that individuals who move from exempt to non-exempt, if they're in the optional retirement plan of THEC, they had to have been in that plan for more than 5 years. If not, they go to TCRS. So there's benefit implications associated with the decisions that we'll make here as well. So this is not a process that we're going to enter into likely. We do anticipate that it's likely this will be effective July 1. January 1 is still to be determined. Switching gears a little bit on access and success to play off Commissioner Wharton's comments. You're aware of enrollment across the state, but here's enrollment at East Tennessee State University. You see the decline that we experienced as a result of COVID, but our enrollment has begun to rebound post-COVID. You see the largest undergraduate and graduate programs at the institution. We're a health science-focused university, so it makes sense that 3 of the 5 are in the health sciences space, but emerging programs, especially in computer science. This is a profile of our freshman class. Last year was the largest freshman class in the history of the university, 2,141 students. Not only was it the largest class, it was the best prepared class academically, GPA of 3.6, ACT score of approaching a 24. You see the significant increase in the number of Tennesseans who were part of that freshman class. Our concern is, as we look to carry that forward, you're well aware of the college-going rate declines over time, but here's those college-going rates in our area. And you see that for some counties in our area, the college-going rate is in the 30%. And that is not a constant number. That number for men is less than that number for women. You're seeing a disparate impact in terms of college-going decisions. The change in Granger County, 26% over a pretty short period of time. So what we have done in our region to address this challenge is we've brought together educators from secondary and post-secondary ed, high school leaders, superintendents, presidents of institutions, 2-year, 4-year public-private. We've created a P20 council to focus on interventions to address the college-going culture in the region, to bring entities together, to look at data alignment, but to use data and policy to drive a conversation in our region that's bringing the sectors of K-12 and higher education more closely together to help move those numbers. We're about a year in on this effort, and one of the areas where we're zeroing in is on workforce needs. As Comptroller Mumpower is aware, there's a critical nursing shortage in our area. So working in conjunction with Ballot Health, the region's premier healthcare entity, we have created a pipeline program to target students in the 9th grade, to move them through pre-health programs, to give them the opportunity to earn an LPN, and then to move into a BSN program at the institution. So we're looking at programs intentionally that generate pipelines to employment, and all of that is emerging from the P20 efforts across the region. You're well aware of the kerfuffle that is the FAFSA, but what's the impact of that on our institution? At ETSU, our registrations for orientation are down 20%. The number of FAFSAs that have been sent to us as of the 8th of this month are 4,000 fewer than they were this time last year. And unless we're able to move the needle with some interventions, we anticipate that our freshman class might be down a little bit. We just started processing aid a week ago. We just started processing aid a week ago. So there's a series of interventions that are underway, phone calls, handwritten notes from students, really looking to drive to students who are in the applicant pool to push them through to enrollment. I want to thank this commission, and in particular Dr. Gentile, for the actions that you took yesterday to extend the FAFSA deadline. This will allow many of these students to complete their aid packages, which will allow us to then go through the awarding process, which will allow us to then close this gap. I anticipate that when we appear before our board in the fall, our freshman class will be back up at 2,100 because of the interventions we have in place between now and then. But if you're a high school student who is trying to make a decision on where to go to school, and you do not have a sense of what your campus aid package is going to be, it makes it very difficult for you to make the decision on where to go to school. And that financial aid package is more than just the lottery scholarship. There's institutional aid embedded in that total award letter. So as you look at numbers that are coming in across the state, please recognize the work that's occurring in the financial aid offices and in the admissions offices across the state to help close these gaps and to help students complete the process. I know as a parent of a college student, which is still hard for me to wrap my brain around, that the system hasn't worked. In fact, last night I was trying to finalize a portion of my son's FAFSA. I've been kicked out of the system 4 times, and I still haven't been able to complete it. It is just an absolute nightmare. So as you look at numbers going into the fall, just thank your financial aid staff and your admissions staff for the work that they're doing to try to drive through the challenge that has been created for all of us as a result of the FAFSA. And the thing that here is difficult to understand is that these students are potentially stepping away from higher education at a time that we need them more than ever. As the chair noted, we've got a significant gap in the labor supply, but we need people going to school. And you see the earnings impact, but there's also a health impact, expansion of life expectancy. And you are aware of these numbers, but ultimately that's what all this means. Of every 100 ninth graders in the state of Tennessee, how many graduate from college on time? 24. And those numbers will move for this class because of the impact that the FAFSA has had on the college going rate. I want to give you a quick update on some things that are happening at our institution. This is a very busy time on our campus. I want to thank our provost, Dr. Kimberly McCorkle, who's here with us today, because many of the items that are on this slide are items that she is leading. We as an institution are revamping our enrollment management efforts, not only our efforts to bring students into the institution, but how we provide wraparound advising services to drive student success. We want to make up for the gaps that occurred during COVID around student success and bring our retention rates back up to the board's goal that they've set for us of an 80% retention rate for freshmen and a 60% graduation rate for students. For the first time in decades, we've redesigned our Gen Ed core to ensure that courses that are in the general education requirements align to workforce needs and are embedded with impactful experiences for students as undergrads to serve and to be engaged in the community. So an infusion of service learning opportunities, internship opportunities, and engagement with our students in the community as a whole. We are going through a process of restructuring the academic composition of the university. The first time we've had a holistic review of college structure in more than 40 years, and we'll take to our board next week a proposal to restructure the academic aspects of the university. We're looking at the composition of our financial aid programs and the balance between need-based aid and merit-based aid. We're revisiting our campus budget model. Just as you have a funding formula that rewards institutions for performance, we have an internal model that rewards colleges for performance, and we're moving through a process of adjusting that. And then last but not least, we're moving through the process of transitioning from more than a 25-year-old Banner-operated system, our ERP, to an Oracle-based system. So there's a lot that's happening across campus above and beyond the things that you read about in the newspaper. All of this is related to our board strategic plan, and here you see the timeline for our academic restructure. Thank you for the work that your academic staff has provided. We've kept them up to speed as this moves through in the event that the creation of some new colleges comes to this body for its review and approval. Just a couple of other quick updates. I want to thank the Commission for its support last year of funding for the Gatton College of Pharmacy, and thank this Commission and the constitutional officers for your support of formally recognizing Gatton as a non-formula unit. But want to once again put a marker that there are still additional needs at Gatton. The $2.5 million that the state provided last year does not fully equalize tuition and fees between us and the state's other publicly funded College of Pharmacy. For example, tuition and fees at ETSU for a Tennessean are $27,000. At UT, it's $22,000. So we would like to come back before you next year with once again a request that allows us to then equalize tuition and fees. The impact of the funding on enrollment that you provided last year has been meaningful. The first year class that will enroll in about a month and a half is up 18% over last year. So we've seen enrollment growth as a result of the reduction in pricing, but it's also impacted quality. NAPLEX, which is the licensure test that you have to take in order to practice in the profession of pharmacy, we were #1 in the state of Tennessee on that pass rate and #2 in the nation. So the second highest pass rate on the NACLPlex of any college of public pharmacy in the United States of America was at your East Tennessee State University. And then for our students who are graduating and going into residency, we had the #1 match rate in the state and the #6 match rate in the nation. So the investments that you've made are already making a difference, and we thank you for the support that you've provided to Gatton. On capital projects, I've stood before you year after year after year. As you move through the work, we thank you for anything that can be done to provide predictability, to see projects move from 1 to 3 to 5 to 7 to 1. It's difficult for us to plan. We have a project that is partially funded. The other half of the building is going to be back before you again next year, and recognize inflationary pressures. 2 weeks ago, I had staff sit down and brief me on projected costs for a small building on campus, $1,000 a square foot. When it originally went out to bid, it was $600 a square foot. So the prices, the longer we wait, are just going through the roof. So as we look at capital, recognizing the way the process works, each year that a project sits, that project goes more and more in cost by the year. I want to thank you as well for the investments that you've made in safety and infrastructure. We will use that purposefully on our campus, and our board has challenged us to ensure that we do all we can to provide a safe learning environment for our students. And then finally, just a little update on partnership work that's occurring across the state. And Dr. Gentile mentioned the work he's doing around culture, engagement, and the way in which individuals view the impact of higher education. The universities have worked together over the past year on a 4 for the Future campaign that's been focused on messaging to the state the importance of a baccalaureate degree and the return on an investment that a baccalaureate degree has, not only for students but for communities as a whole. In closing, I've got pictures of graduation because it was just 2 weeks ago that more than 2,000 students walked across the stage and received their degree from our institution. More than 40% of those students are first generation. Almost half of those students were Pell eligible. And we may not see the impact of that degree next year in terms of earnings. You may not see the impact of that degree 5 years from now in terms of earnings. But I can guarantee you the degrees that our students received will change the arc of history for they and their families. Because one of the things that's wonderful about this commencement is we also bring back individuals who are part of our Golden 50s Club, people who graduated 50 years ago from ETSU. And to hear their stories of how their life was changed and touched by the university is humbling, and it's inspiring. So I thank you for the inspiring work that you do, and thank you for the opportunity to share some brief highlights of things that are happening at East Tennessee State University.
That's fantastic information. Thank you very much for sharing, President Nolan. Does anyone have any questions? Yes, Commissioner Coburn.
Thank you so much for that presentation, President Nolan. It was great, it was factual, and it was very eye-opening, too. I dare say that in your financial aid, you're going to be racking up some overtime hours as you approach this summer. And of course, the deadline's been extended to the end of May, but I wonder if it won't need an additional deadline. I know the campuses are I know the campuses are weighing. Do we pay this overtime if this does in fact go into effect, or do we change these people's status and give them a raise right now, which is going to be less? But what does that do to your internal salary structure? And does it help you fill the open positions? So there seems to be a lot of turnover in the student-facing positions. Does it help you fill those?
So let's talk first about the compression aspect. If we were to move every single individual, and we'll not do that. From a process perspective, we've provided each of the vice presidents with a list of the employees who would be immediately impacted at July 1. And we're asking them to go through the process of identifying workflow, identifying whether or not that individual should stay as exempt or be moved to non-exempt, and then to make the determination around overtime pay. I anticipate that the bulk of this first group will move, but the second group is 500 employees. We have 2,600 employees overall. That's a pretty significant number. That impacts both admissions and financial aid staff, but you've got to remember we also run a significant healthcare infrastructure in Northeast Tennessee. So these are frontline staffs and doctors' offices, nurses' clinics, et cetera. If we moved everyone to 58, the salary compression that would occur would be astronomical, but we also would be in a position where those 500 staff members, many would be making more than starting pay for faculty.
Yeah.
So if you're a faculty member in my discipline, political science, coming in as a brand new member of the community, you're not going to start at 58. So there's a lot that has to be examined here. In addition to looking at compression, we're also implementing a new salary schedule for the institution with job families, spans and layers for pay. So there's more to this than just a knee-jerk reaction to move everyone to 58. And we're going to spend the next couple of months going through that process. Our salary increases are effective November 1. So between now and November 1, we've got to complete that work.
It's a lot of work.
At the same time, we're changing from Banner to Oracle.
Yes, I did think about that. I've been through that process before. Well, good luck to you, and thank you very much for everything you do.
Madam Chair,
Please.
before President takes his seat, if we ever have a position of outstanding intern alum of THEC, I want to make sure he gets the first. I think I may have been.
It's over there in Russ Deaton, sir.
Oh, yeah.
He deserves the first award.
But seriously, in terms of, we're talking about making a difference. I remember one of his first, usually interns, you say you want them, but a lot of them get in the way because you don't have anything for them.
That's not true with our interns, guys. If you're watching this.
How many times can you move books from one shelf to the other side of the room and move them back the next week? But I recall one of your first papers, we were emphasizing why teacher education programs are so critical. And I think you did the study that showed that most of them go back within 100 miles of their home to teach. And so, failure can be incestuous, but success can also become. What we produce here goes right back. I don't know whether those statistics still prevail or not, but it was an intern. It was an intern who brought that research to us. So again, if we go back to my question of do we make a difference, interns do make a difference. And you're still making a difference.
Mr. Warden, thank you.
I do nominate you for our first outstanding THEC alum award.
Well, on the story note, I'll never forget the commission meeting when the tornado had hit the building the day before the meeting. And we were on the phone with you, sir, in Memphis trying to decide whether or not to hold a commission meeting the next day. And you asked us to delay given the challenges that the city and the state were facing as a result of the tornado. But as an intern for the next 3 months, my job was to walk the 19 floors twice a day to get the mail.
You did a great job.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. That concludes my report.
Okay, before you go, you're talking a lot about the access, and we've had this conversation this morning. What more can THEC be doing to help support you and the other LGIs, specifically when it comes to access? That's on one side of my question. The other question, a comment I'd like for Dr. Gentile to address. I believe there's going to be an upcoming gathering of presidents and the THEC team to talk about policy. So there's the policy side, but there's also anything else that THEC might be able to do to support all of the LGIs with some, you're having the same challenges across all the university campuses.
Well, from the access point, there's multiple layers to it. The first is how do we drive home the messaging of the importance of post-secondary education to raise opportunities for economic development enhancement for the state. That's 2-year, 4-year public-private. The student who goes to get a welding certificate at TCAT in Morristown or Elizabethton, that's post-secondary attainment. So it's driving home the messages that degrees matter, and it's doing that in a grassroots level the way you do with Gear Up programs and others. But then it's, extension of the deadline around the submission of the FAFSA. That's critical. Some states have just waived the deadline. How do we get to a point in which we recognize this year is just, in many respects, a disaster? I'm aware of some states who said we're not going to move through this process the way we've moved it through in the past. So I think the recognition that this is an ever-evolving situation, the feds still don't have the kinks in this process worked out completely. And if we have to bend a rule or a policy to benefit our students, then let's bend a rule or a policy to benefit our students.
Yeah, I'm going to add a couple thoughts. And I'll just say that Dr. Nolan has also been, positively pushing us and our data partners across the agencies to also expand access to data, to be able to see students who are crossing state lines where they're going. We've got a couple of irons in the fire on that right now to support that as well. Going to talk about the president's convening, I am intent and working. As he walks away, thank you again, Dr. Nolan. I appreciate it. He's like scurries away. I am intent on making sure that we map on to the administration's policy development process and the General Assembly's policy development process, our policy development process, because I feel like in the past we've been behind schedule on that. So we're already starting to work through that, and I've been in talks with the administration and our partners across the state too. But on June 28th, I'm convening the presidents of the LGIs, President Boyd and Chancellor Tidings of TBR as well, to come and talk and here in our building on the 30th floor to map out where we want to go with policies this year. And of course, you as our primary stakeholders will be will consult and direct us on where to go ultimately on that, but I want to get that process started with our presidents too. This will be an ongoing conversation throughout the year. And if I can real quick, I want to recognize President Michael Torrance from Motlow State, who walked into the audience just about 10 minutes ago. Good to see you here today, sir. To also pivot back to the FAFSA conversation, we did formally yesterday extend the deadline from May 15 to May 31st. I want to thank internally, everyone is pitching in and supporting here on this, and I'm not going to name names because that'll take about 15 minutes to do so. But Tennessee Achieves, the ARIS Foundation, TACUA, our institutions, TBR, UT, the LGIs, have been a part of every single part of this decision on how we navigate this, and thank you to them. But I also want to thank specifically Governor Lee yesterday for amplifying our message on extending the deadline. We didn't want to miss an opportunity to rally around it. What I can say is that we are still leading the nation along with Louisiana on the percentage of Tennesseans who are submitting FAFSAs, percentage of high school seniors specifically. And Brett Gibson, our Chief Access Officer, just sent me some numbers. Compared to about last year, a couple days before the deadline, we had about 80% of our Tennessee Promise applicants submit a FAFSA, and 2 days ago, we're at 68%. And that is some months behind schedule as well because the deadlines have changed. So we're behind, we're improving. I want to thank everyone for pitching in on this too. Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, and formal thank you, Dr. Nolan / best intern of THEC, for your presentation. So next up is an executive committee update. So we called an executive committee recently to discuss 2 items. One is officer terms, and the other one is the permanence of our committees. And so with the committees that we have, and we met last week and also yesterday, are ad hoc committees that we established last August. And we wanted to discuss as a executive committee whether we wanted to continue with those committees. And it sounds like overwhelmingly people have that interest. Commissioner Coben joined in the conversation as well as Secretary Hargett as we talked about whether we wanted to continue with the committees. There's a lot more robust discussions happening in those committee discussions. So I think that is valuable for everyone. So we have asked the staff to come back to us with an official charter of what that would look like. Treasurer Lillard had mentioned that last August. We want to make sure we have it in formal writing as we move forward. So we'll be able to review that this summer at some point. The other question was in regards to officer terms. So last July, no, 2 Julys ago, I guess we nominated, elected Commissioner Cope to be the chair of the commission while he was fishing in Alaska. And so when he came back in November, he politely decided that it was time to not do that. He had been in role for 7 years, which I think is a really long time for anyone to be in role. Looking at other commissions, looked at the State Board of Education specifically, since it's so closely aligned. The way the state board operates is they elect their executive officers for 2 years at a time. They do allow them to be consecutively elected, 2 years, 2 years, 2 years. Outside of this world, my experience has been 2 years is a pretty normal thing for an executive officer, but only 2 terms, and then you step off for 1 term, and then you can be reelected after that period of time if it makes sense. And the discussion ended with the desire for us to have staff propose to us in writing that sort of approach with our executive officers. So you get elected for 2 years. You have an option of being elected for a 2nd term after that. And after that period of time, then you would not be able to be reelected for that executive officer. In hopes of having 2 years in position is that it provides better consistency for whoever the commissioner is sitting in role to be working with staff over a 2-year period versus a 1-year period. It's a little bit inconsistency if that person is changing on such a regular basis. And it also gives consistency, an opportunity across the commission members to have different people in the roles as opposed to having the same person serve for an extended period of time. So that we've asked the staff to come back to us to review that. Again, we will receive that in writing this summer. That's my report on the executive committee. Next up, we have the legislative update. I'd like to hear from Mr. Lou Hanneman. You are recognized.
Madam Chair, could I just offer one thing before? Just also one thing that we found that's been very, very helpful, and it's definitely something that you're doing here, is giving the different members chances to chair other committees. Kind of allows them to, I mean, obviously with a group like this, you've got so many people that have accomplished so much in life, but it's great that you've got this committee process in place so that whoever does get elected chair down the road absolutely knows what they're getting into, and that's something that we found very useful as well.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Members of the commission, just a quick, relatively, update on the legislative session, which was the second of the 2-year overall 113th General Assembly. They did close out a couple weeks ago or so. And, you know, just in terms of an overview, I think one of the things that we noticed during the special session over the summer was increasing talk about fiscal constraint, and that there being a different dynamic from previous years where we have seen an abundance of surplus revenue, both recurring and non-recurring, so plenty of money to do just about anything. And then that kind of turned a little bit, and then as we came into session, what we heard really were, you know, conversations around the franchise and excise tax and its potential impact on, you know, what available revenue we had for this year. And so a pretty tight rein-in was imposed on all things budget. As you'll notice later, I'll give a quick overview of the appropriations, but, you know, a lot of our requests, other than the outcomes funding formula, much like every other state agency, were put on hold for the year. That's not to say that next year the spigot will turn back on. I think we're entering into a little bit more of a conservative approach to the use of those funds, but certainly this year was very tight. As it relates to the franchise and excise tax, it was, you know, really an issue where all parties were on relatively different sides, and that issue wasn't resolved really even until the last day of session. And so with deep fiscal impact potential there. Similarly, a conversation throughout the course of session was this Education Freedom Scholarship legislation. The two chambers were pretty far apart on what they wanted to accomplish with that legislation, not so much with what they wanted to do around the actual scholarships themselves, but what they also wanted to do with the bill. Ultimately, that legislation did not move forward, which has left, you know, it was accounted for in the appropriations bill. That accounting is somewhere in the neighborhood of $150 million for the voucher, the Freedom Scholarship portion of that bill. But that money will simply go back to the coffers and be available next year as conversations continue. Quick overview of the appropriations this year. That, you know, as we always kind of hope, the legislature did fully fund the outcomes formula as recommended by the governor's budget. But there were a handful of other additions to the budget over time and with the legislature's input. Chief among them was a $67.5 million or so rural health pathways investment. That money will be coming through THEC vis-a-vis TennCare. And that will be about $15.5 million this year. That will go out in the form of grants and other awards for a whole assortment of purposes, mostly dealing with healthcare, particularly in our rural areas, using our college and university partners to implement that on the fiscal side and the programmatic side. There'll be a lot more to come on that. Our academic affairs and workforce development alignment, still working on that, are actively working on developing the RFP for that. And I know our legal team is working with TennCare to finalize the language around that transfer of funds. Other key points, capital outlay. There were 2 projects fully funded here this year, one for UTC. This is the Fletcher Hall building to assist the Rollins College of Business with their renovations over that building, and also renovation of the gross anatomy lab at the UT Health Science Center. Definitely a needed project and long overdue. There was another allowance for UT to begin planning on, or begin the planning process for their chemistry building, which was this year's #1 project on our capital outlay list. Couple last things. There was continued funding for MTSU and Meharry and their partnership on medical pathways, as well as additional funding for TTU to facilitate bringing the wind tunnel down from up north down to Tennessee and get that installed and then carry forward on an ongoing basis. Going to touch briefly on financial aid. Just for some context here, a lot of the conversation around financial aid is hinged on 2 real discussions. One, the sustainability of the Tennessee Promise endowment, which I'm happy to say that in a number of conversations with Treasurer Lillard's staff and him personally, as well as our THEC team, we are very close. And we are within hailing distance of being able to put a pin in not only a 10-year celebration of Tennessee Promise, but the only state ever to install and establish a program like that and then set it up for perpetual funding. It's a huge accomplishment. We'll probably get over the $1 billion mark in that endowment this year, which is a huge lift, and we should all be pretty proud of that. The other context piece here is one of the revenue streams into the lottery is the sports wagering funds. There's been a lot of discussion over the last 3 or 4 years about what to do with those funds. If you'll recall, back when the sports wagering legislation was passed, one of the critical fulcrums for that deal was that the money from the privilege tax go to scholarships and higher education. That now is in some degree of question. It's a significant amount of money, and it's growing each year. I believe this year it'll be around $67 or $68 million from those proceeds. And there's big questions now about what to do with that going forward. I think ideally we'd like to see it stay in scholarships, and we can expand some of those programs to, again, augment a lot of the work that was discussed here today. But the legislature decided to take a pause on moving any big initiatives forward this year. In fact, there were only a couple of financial aid bills to move forward, none of which really had a significant fiscal impact. Most notably, Tennessee Promise students being eligible to pursue post-secondary enrollment in the summer immediately following their graduation. This is critical. We don't want students to wait. We want them to jump in, get through, carry that momentum forward. And so, legislation was passed this year to make that happen. Similarly, for TCAT students who were dual enrolled in high school, if you'll recall, a couple of years ago, legislation was passed to allow TCAT students or dual enrolled CTE students to pursue just about an entire credential. But not all of them can finish. Legislation was passed this year to give them a priority enrollment status. If you're coming out of high school with significant credits, you should be able to roll right into a slot. And it's a limited time frame for you to elect to take advantage of that slot, but it's there. And so that's a strong move. Finally, the Tennessee, the Future Teacher Scholarship Program, which is a loan forgiveness program operated out of THEC. It's a pilot program for 5 years. We've had pretty low engagement in that, which is to say one student took advantage of that program this past year. It does have a significant promissory to go along with that, where you do have to commit to teaching in a rural or a shortage area. But this year, legislation was passed to bring in Western Governors University as an eligible institution. My brief presentation is getting longer by the moment.
Quick question here. You mentioned the Tennessee Promise being available to students this summer after they graduate. What if they graduate in December? Can they go in January?
Those students were already eligible
They are,
to move forward quickly. We had exception language for early graduates, but we didn't have exception language for traditional graduates due to the academic year definition. So an exception was made for them. Switching to legislation kind of relative to academic and student affairs, a handful of critical pieces here. One, I think quality non-degree credentials was mentioned earlier by Stephen. Following on the heels of substantial work from Dr. Julie Roberts and some of our other staff in partnership with national and state stakeholders, a definition around quality non-degree credentials was developed. We have now got that into the statute. So pretty significant achievement there, but it also sets a baseline for further discussions around what are quality non-degree credentials and how best can the state pivot to meet those, the financial aid needs for those different programs. Artificial intelligence, very much top of mind for legislators this year. Legislation was passed to encourage institutions to adopt a policy with the long-term understanding that this is such a changing field that has the potential to impact higher education in such a way. Also, security around our academic research enterprise. This is a recognized need. There's always the threat of espionage and attacks on that research. Legislation was passed to encourage institutions to develop and deploy effective policies to safeguard that research. And then report back on the value of that and what that looks like. A piece of legislation brought by THEC this year was to, one, recognize the success of the VETS, Veterans Education Transition Support legislation. And it's been in place for about 10 years. It's helped about 18,000 students move through that pipeline. These are student veterans. This year, we launched a second phase to that legislation, which would be the VETS Bravo designation. And really this centers on the continued focus on services for student veterans, particularly around career placement services, having dedicated staff on each campus to help student veterans move on, transition into post-secondary and then out to a career. One piece of legislation that kind of came out of left field, if you will, is a one-year opportunity for students who graduated from an unaccredited engineering technology program. This did stem from a Tennessee institution who had a technology program that at its inception was not accredited, had a number of graduates. They were in pursuit of accreditation. And so the legislation essentially says that anyone who graduated from a program like that, but also meets a number of other professional experience, letters of recommendation, and also the ability to sit for the engineering exams, could then pursue licensure here in Tennessee. This is a one-year window of opportunity for those graduates to take advantage of it or not. One piece of legislation that we did not craft, but we did recommend in our food insecurity report, and we're very supportive of, was the hunger-free campus legislation. This would have set up some grants for our campuses to augment their on-campus food pantries, but also just putting forth communication and promotion of resources for students who do experience food insecurity on our campuses. It made it all the way through the process except for the funding process. And so, perhaps that legislation will come back next year. We'll be supportive again. It was a recommendation in our food insecurity report that was conducted by Dr. Jacob Kamer and others. And so we definitely want to support that moving forward. Any questions so far?
Thank you. I wanted to ask before you went to your next slide, a question about the campus artificial intelligence policies, and then the next item, the security policy regarding academic research. I'm sure there are some schools that are further along in both of those areas than others. Do we do any sharing, mapping, templating within all of our schools to sort of help each other along?
If I had to guess, I think that the campuses do have a pretty robust convening amongst themselves to discuss these types of matters.
It's on an informal.
Exactly. I do know that as Dr. Gentile and others from the state are engaged in this conversation on the national level, some of those best practices will come back.
Yeah.
But I think they're also, the institutions are all very cognizant of the impact and changes that are associated with artificial intelligence. And so I think their policies will probably resemble each other, in a lot of ways.
If I can just add real quick that our intent is to, getting through with this commission, to see if we can help navigate some alignment around our institutions. When I think about artificial intelligence, I think a lot of people are concerned about cheating, and that's a very practical concern. I think my main concern lies in the have and have-nots of institutions when it comes to embracing the technology to make them more efficient and effective as well. So what are some best practices that we can speak to across the enterprise? Thank you.
Moving on, another kind of consistent theme over the last several years have been campus safety and social justice issues on the campus. This year, there were a number of gun and firearm-related pieces of legislation. None of them moved forward that would directly impact the institutions. This one, however, does allow persons to carry non-lethal methods of protection. And I have so this would involve, pepper sprays, mace, gel guns, and even electronic control devices and the like. This is a change. This would allow you to carry these products on your person in order to kind of, one, protect yourself. I think that, there was a lot of discussion between the campuses and the sponsors on this legislation. I think it ended up generally where everyone could be okay with it. And so kind of a best of all possible results there. Another ongoing issue, not unrelated to the academic research protections, is the material support for terrorist organizations. The State Department and the courts do designate certain entities as terrorist organizations, and when they're recognized as such, they fall into a list of entities that cannot be supported by our post-secondary institutions, either with space or finances or other material resources on the campus. And so I think that this has, definitely implications that butt up against free speech conversations. I think that this legislation ended at a place where, all parties were relatively, on board with what was trying to be accomplished. And so I think we'll continue to see these types of bills come forward over the years. There's not much to do about that in this day and age. Finally, the divisive concepts complaint reporting. The divisive concepts legislation went into the statute a year or two ago. It involves a number of issues that may or may not be discussed in classrooms and on campus. This simply provides a mechanism for students or faculty to report complaints and then have those complaints compiled into annual reports back to the General Assembly. And so it's really just a reporting element on top of legislation that had moved previously. A couple of things that did not move forward this year, there were a number of bills dealing with DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, protected classes, as well as library content and access restrictions. Actually, all of those pieces of legislation did go by the wayside for one reason or another. I think mostly because the topic was too broad, and it needs a little bit more work. And so the discussions were certainly robust and heated, and probably will not go away. But this year, the legislature decided to kind of sit on those and continue to have those discussions before moving forward with something permanent in statute. And lastly, to kind of wrap up, there were a number of pieces of legislation dealing with purview and governance. The first of which has been mentioned here already, is the TSU sunset legislation. In its final form, this legislation did extend the Tennessee State University Board of Trustees for 2 years, but it did also reconstitute their board by vacating the existing board. And of course, as we now know, that board has been reappointed by the governor with some pre-approval and certainly vetting from the General Assembly leadership. The decision was made not to hold confirmation hearings for those members until January, and so certainly enough time for them to get on their feet and get the institution under some reins before making decisions about their permanent status. In a similar vein, legislation was brought that would, in the event that a board was vacated without the opportunity to reappoint that board for some time, that the Tennessee Higher Education Commission as a body would assume the governance role in that interim period. Obviously, a delicate dance for this board to play, to our commission to play as a governing board. There were certain pieces put in there. Our legal staff worked pretty diligently with legal over at the General Assembly to kind of navigate those waters and ensure that conflict of interest was respected, but also the separation of what the role of a governing board is versus a coordinating board at the state level. This legislation did pass, and so it is out there. It was most often called a stopgap piece of legislation should the worst happen and a board be vacated without the opportunity to reappoint in the short term. Really bright spot for innovative policy making. The University of Memphis did move forward with legislation that classifies their university school as essentially an LEA. I think what it was primarily was a recognition that the university school is a fantastic model for education. It's been very successful in Memphis and Shelby County, and this gives them an opportunity to expand that model and increase their service area, but also to share those best practices with the schools in Memphis and Shelby County. I think everybody's pretty excited about where they could go with that and the implications for our other university schools in the state. Another piece of legislation brought by, requested by THEC was around state authorization reciprocity. This allows us to offer our campuses reciprocity agreements for online education without having to be authorized in each state and territory around the country. When the legislation was first passed, our fee structure was married technically to the national board. This legislation allowed us to decouple that. And so, how we adjust fees or don't adjust fees or modify them is now completely the purview of this body, as opposed to simply being, informed by a national body. And this last piece of legislation was certainly one that you're all familiar with. There were a number of updates over the course of legislative session. This was the THEC restructuring / responsibilities bill. Ultimately, this bill did not pass. It was in pretty different forms, both in the House and Senate side of this. And ultimately, the decision was, a lot of progress has been made towards resolving some of the issues, and it needs to be thought about a little bit longer. So I am sure that conversations will continue around all of the matters that were brought up. It touched every aspect of this agency for sure, whether it was financial aid, tuition, capital, academic affairs, and the board structure itself. And so we look forward to those conversations, and I think that'll be, certainly top of mind for the convening of presidents in a month or two, and, for ongoing conversations with all our stakeholders, particularly the General Assembly. And just to close on one lighter note, if you're thinking about going back to school, I recommend the distillery program at Motlow. you'll actually be able to engage in the tastings. So, a nod to President Torrance's work before the General Assembly. That's, again, an overview. It definitely does not capture the amount of work that went into this legislative session from our institutions, as well as this agency. But, you know, happy to answer any questions, and I'll be sure to send around a full document of the bills that did pass once they're all public chaptered.
Any questions for Mr. Hanneman?
Chairman Scarlett, this is thank you for giving me a moment here. I just want to thank Lou for everything he's done this session, something that he and I have had lots of conversation. There is more up in his head about what's going on than is on these slides right now as well. And I want to thank him and also Jesse Green, our Director of Comms as well, for enhancing how we communicate that out to this commission, to other stakeholders, to Commissioner Coben for pushing on that with us. I appreciate that too, but that's been immensely valuable for us internally as well, just to make sure that we know as much as we can how to support Lou and his work across the street. But the moment session is done, I ask him, okay, where are you going to go for the next month? It's usually hiking the Appalachian Trail or something like that. But thank you very much, Lou, for everything you've done this session.
Thanks so much, Lou. So the final agenda item is other business. Does anyone have any other business to discuss? No? Well, to quote Mayor Wharton, let's just keep making a difference for the students of Tennessee. So we are officially adjourned.